A Heroine's Beginning, Chapter 8. I did not sleep much that night. It was practically morning anyway. I helped Ella up to my room and laid her down on the bed, as she still didn't have a place to sleep. She cried herself to sleep. I lay in my bed next to her and closed my eyes. I fell asleep for about an hour, before the sun was too bright to continue. I got up and changed quietly, then rooted around in a drawer and found a black ribbon that I had worn when Lady Eleanor had died. I braided my hair back and secured it with the ribbon. It was the least I could do out of respect. I did not own a black dress. I walked slowly down the stairs to the kitchen. Mrs. Taylor was already up, cooking breakfast. My siblings were not awake, and neither was Miss Pole. She was hit especially hard by the master's passing. She had worked here for years, ever since Sir Henry and Lady Eleanor got married. She had watched Ella grow up, and was very fond of the family. Mrs. Taylor and I decided to let her sleep. Mrs. Taylor was understandably upset and a little annoyed. She had been forced to serve dinner the night before to the 3 ladies. Apparently, Lady Cecil had walked into the kitchen and found only Miss Taylor there. She had asked when dinner was to be served, and Mrs. Taylor told her that she thought dinner was cancelled until it was clear what was to be done about Sir Henry. Lady Cecil became enraged at that, and told her that dinner was going to be served in 5 minutes. When Mrs. Taylor pointed out that there was no one to serve them the food, Lady Cecil demanded that Miss Taylor serve them, or she would be fired. My dislike of Lady Cecil was growing by the minute. However, I was too tired to think clearly. We prepared breakfast, and I went up to the dining room when the bell was rung. I walked into the room to find Lady Cecil, Lady Anna, and Lady Jacqueline sat at the table. Only Lady Jacqueline displayed any sign of grief, with eyes that were obviously red. I greeted them. "Lady Jacqueline, Lady Anna, Lady Cecil," I said, placing down the bowls of porridge in front of them. "It's Lady Kingston now," she said sharply. She clearly had not lost any sleep. I bit my tongue. I was not sure if it was the lack of sleep or the grief, but I was really beginning to hate this woman. The name Cecil was the only thing tying her to her late husband, and she had clearly found the first opportunity to lose it. Ella was now the only Cecil. Her family was truly gone. She could not even say that she had relatives by name. I gritted my teeth together, desperately trying to keep in the rage I felt at this evil woman. They ate their food in silence. When they were done, Lady Kingston addressed me. "I need you to gather all the servants in the drawing-room in half an hour," she informed me. I nodded, skeptical of what this was about. When I returned to the kitchen, Daniel and Clara had woken up and were sat eating breakfast at the table. I told them of Lady Kingston's demand, and went to go rouse Mrs. Pole. I found her laid on the bed, still in her work clothes. Her pillow was wet with tears. I gently shook her awake, and told her we had to be in the drawing-room in a few minutes. We all stood in the drawing-room moments later, a little apprehensive about why we were there. Clara stood next to me, chewing her nails. Lady Kingston entered the room, practically strutting, and stopped in front of us. She squared her shoulders and held her head up. "I'm afraid that the events of last night will change our living situation. Our finances will no longer stretch to accommodate you. We will have to live without the luxury of servants," she said. She made it sound like she was the worst off in the situation. My heart stopped. We were all being let go. I would have to leave this place I had lived for the last 3 years of my life. Some of my happiest memories were here, and we were being thrown out without a hint of regret. "I expect you all to be out of my house by the end of the day." Then she swiftly turned on her heel and walked out, leaving us all to stare after her in shock. I wanted to scream. I could not lose my job. We needed the money too much. And it was not just that. I had been here for 3 years. I had memories in this house. She could not just throw us out like yesterday's rubbish. It was too unfair. The small bud of hatred that had taken seed inside me was starting to grow. and I had to keep a tight grip on my rage. I could feel it building inside me. I returned to my room and saw Miss Ella still asleep. I quietly started to pack my bag. It did not take very long. I did not own very much. I went to the table with a basin on it to pick up my small bag containing ribbons and hairpins. My hip caught on the side of the table, which caused the jug to wobble, making a loud sound. Ella woke up at that. Her eyes were wide with surprise for a minute, but then her face fell, remembering the events of the previous night. "I'm sorry for waking you," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "It's all right," she replied. Then she saw my bag open on the bed. "What are you doing?" "Lady Kingston just fired all of us. We have to leave by the end of the day." Ella sat there in shock. "It's just so unfair," I exclaimed. "I've worked here for so long. I don't want to leave." I sat down on the bed, upset and angry. "No, surely she would not do that. Why would she do this?" Ella asked. "She said with your father gone, they didn't have enough money to keep us on." "That can't be true. We've never had any financial trouble before." This was meant kindly, but it only made me more annoyed at her ladyship. Ella stopped for a moment and looked at me questioningly. "Did you say Lady Kingston? She's Lady Cecil." "No," I replied. "She told me to call her Lady Kingston again." Ella's face fell even more. By changing her name, Lady Evil, as I was now going to call her, had already distanced herself from her late husband, and by extension, Ella. I could not believe this woman could be so cold-hearted. I had never felt hate before at anyone, but seeing Ella's face and the hurt in her eyes pushed me over the edge. I could stand for it no longer. I told Ella I would be back in a minute and marched out of the room. If I was already fired, she could do nothing else to me. I stormed into the dining room to find Lady Kingston and Lady Anna sat sewing. They both looked at me when I came in. "How could you?" I shouted at her. "Miss Ella just lost her father, and now you get rid of all of us. You're taking away the people who care about her. And we have worked in this house for years, longer than you've been here. You can't just toss us out like objects. The master would never have done this to us, and you bring shame on his memory by doing so. You don't even have the basic decency to keep the Cecil name, just so Miss Ella has some family left. How could you be so cruel?" I tried to stop shouting, but the words came out of my mouth unconsciously. "And another thing. Your husband died, and you're so unfeeling you can't even show a little grief. Did you care for him at all? You stone-cold monster! Did you?" Lady Kingston did not say a word. Her mouth became a tight line as she stared at me in rage. "Answer me!" I stared right back at her, willing her to break eye contact. My attention was grasped by a small noise at the door. I turned and saw Ella standing there, more tears streaming down her face as she looked at Lady Kingston. "Did you love him?" she asked quietly. Lady Kingston stood in front of me. She towered over me. Her eyes were cold and unfeeling as stone. I refused to back down. Then she said in a quiet voice, "Get out of my house, now." I smiled at her and gave her an over-exaggerated curtsy. "I would be happy to. Who would want to stay here with you? You think so much of yourself. You think you're so high and mighty. You've done nothing to deserve it, and you would do well to remember that. Some accident of birth placed you here, but that does not give you the authority to hate the rest of us for not sharing your luck. One day you will learn to regret your actions, and I hope that day comes soon. You witch. Oh, and Anna, your hair looks awful. It always does." I turned around and proudly walked out of the door, leaving the two ladies to stare after me, Lady Anna's mouth agape. I finished packing my bag and went to collect my siblings from their room. They were packed, but looked very downcast. They had only been here for 2 months, but I think they had become very attached to the manor. I told them to hurry. We had to leave now. I did not want to know what would happen if Lady Kingston still saw me in the house. We carried our bags downstairs to the kitchen and said goodbye to Mrs. Pole and Mrs. Taylor, who were sat at the kitchen table, trying to console each other over a cup of tea. I embraced both of them. I knew it was not goodbye forever. They both had families in the village, and so would not be far away. There was no need to say anything. We were all feeling the same emotions: grief, frustration, and anger at the injustice of it all. I felt slightly better now that I had shouted at her ladyship. We left the kitchen and were walking to the gate when we were stopped by Miss Ella. "Marion, wait," she called. I turned around, and she ran to embrace me. "You have to promise to come visit me." "I don't think that's such a good idea," I said. "Your stepmother doesn't like me much anymore." "Well, then I'll have to come visit you. It will be lonely now, without Father and you," she said, with tears in her eyes. I felt very sorry for her, and I wish I could be there for her. "I'd like that very much." "I also think you should have this," she said, pulling a book out of her skirt pocket. I recognized the volume as the Tales of Robin Hood. "Oh, miss, I couldn't possibly. It's your book." "I insist. And there's no need to call me miss anymore. You're not my maid. We're friends," she told me, placing the book in my hand. "And anyway, you've read it more times than me, and certainly enjoy it more. And who here is going to miss it?" I hugged her again, accepting the book. "Thank you so much, Miss Ella," I smiled. But I could tell she was not happy. She was still desperately hurt. "I look forward to your visits." She nodded, and I turned away to join my siblings, and we walked away from the manor house.